The flight was calm in the beginning. The usual buzz of passengers filling the cabin. Some were flipping through magazines. Some were already drifting to sleep. And some were busy with phones before switching them to airplane mode. In row 14, a woman sat quietly by the window. She had chosen the seat because it gave her a view of the clouds. She wanted to rest away from the noise of life on the ground. She leaned back, eyes half closed. The steady hum of the engines felt almost like a lullaby. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle with practiced smiles, offering water, helping with luggage, reminding passengers to fasten belts. Everything seemed ordinary, everything seemed safe. The woman in row 14 let her mind wander. She thought about her trip, the reason she had boarded this plane. She felt the warmth of the sunlight coming through the oval window. Her hand rested gently on the armrest, her breathing slow and peaceful. But in the cockpit, something had shifted. The captain felt an unusual tightness in his chest. At first, he thought it was just fatigue. Long hours often made the body ache. But within minutes, the discomfort grew sharper. Sweat appeared on his forehead. He gripped the controls firmly, trying to mask his weakness. The co-pilot glanced over, sensing the change. His voice carried concern, but the captain insisted he was fine. Yet the strain in his breathing betrayed him. The co-pilot could no longer ignore it. He reached for the radio, his hand steady but his mind racing. Through the intercom, a calm yet urgent voice echoed across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is any licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to the crew." The words startled the passengers. Heads turned. Whispers began. Confusion spread like fire through the rows. The woman in row 14 opened her eyes slowly. At first she thought she had misheard. Maybe she was still half asleep, but the gasps around her confirmed the message was real. She sat upright, heart pounding. The air felt heavier now. The passengers exchanged anxious glances. Some pressed call buttons. Some simply froze in disbelief. It was not the kind of announcement anyone expected on a routine flight. It was the kind of announcement people hoped they would never hear. The cabin crew moved with firm steps, their faces professional but pale beneath the surface. They repeated the call, their eyes scanning the rows, searching for anyone who could answer. The tension grew with each passing second. The woman in row 14 felt her chest tighten. She wasn't a pilot, but she had read stories of such emergencies before. She could see the fear building in the cabin. People were gripping armrests, lips trembling in silent prayers, mothers pulling children close, travelers clutching each other's hands. The co-pilot tried to reassure over the intercom again, his voice steady but carrying a weight. "The situation is under control. Please remain calm." Yet everyone knew such words often meant the opposite. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment. She remembered something her father once told her on a different trip long ago. That courage does not come when things are easy. Courage appears only when there seems no way forward. She whispered the words to herself as if they were a shield. In row 10, a man slowly raised his hand. He was hesitant, his voice low. He said he had flown smaller aircrafts before. Not commercial jets, but he understood basic controls. The attendants hurried toward him, guiding him carefully to the front. The passengers watched in silence, eyes following every step as though hope itself was moving through the aisle. The woman in row 14 found herself holding her breath. Her fingers curled tightly into her palms. She wondered if this stranger could really guide the plane. She wondered if fate had brought him here at this exact moment. The cabin grew quieter. The usual chatter had vanished. Even children sensed the tension, their innocent voices silenced by the storm of worry filling the air. Only the engines roared steadily outside, carrying hundreds of lives forward into the unknown. The woman gazed once more out of the small window beside her. The sky looked endless. The clouds floated like mountains of cotton, and yet for the first time, it did not feel comforting, it felt distant, as though nature itself was indifferent to the struggles inside the aircraft. Her mind raced through possibilities. What if no one could truly take control? What if the situation grew worse? She thought about her family waiting back home. She thought about the unfinished dreams she still carried. Her eyes grew moist, but she forced herself not to cry. Not here. Not now. The crew whispered among themselves at the front. Doors opening and closing. The sound of hurried footsteps reaching even the middle rows. The passengers shifted uneasily, straining to catch any sign of what was happening. Every small noise felt amplified. Every second stretched longer than the last. And then once again the intercom crackled. The voice of the co-pilot. Slower this time, more deliberate. "Please remain seated. We are doing everything possible. The words felt both like comfort and warning. The woman in row 14 pressed her forehead gently against the cold glass of the window, her heart thudding like a drum inside her chest. She realized she was part of something far greater than herself now, a story unfolding in real time, a test of faith, courage, and chance. She whispered quietly under her breath, not for anyone else to hear, but for herself. Please, let us make it through this. Her voice trembled but carried the weight of hope. And as the aircraft cut through the skies, carrying the fear and prayers of every soul inside, the question still echoed in her mind. Is there a pilot on board? The man from row 10 had now entered the cockpit. The cabin door closed behind him, leaving the rest of the passengers with only their imagination. The unknown was always heavier than the truth, and every second that passed stretched like a rope pulled too tight. The woman in row 14 sat still, her palms pressed together as if in silent prayer. She could hear the faint murmurs around her, people whispering their fears to one another, some clutching rosaries, others scrolling quickly through their phones as though searching for courage in familiar pictures. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with forced calmness, offering water, checking belts, reminding people to stay seated. Their smiles were polite but thin, their voices softer than usual. They too were afraid, yet their training pushed them to hide it. From the cockpit, muffled voices carried through the thin walls. The man was speaking with the co-pilot, his tone firm, asking questions, repeating technical words that few in the cabin could understand. Though no one could hear clearly, the urgency was obvious. The woman leaned her head back. Eyes closed, memories flooded her. The first time she had flown, the joy of rising above the earth, the amazement of clouds drifting below her like waves. She had always loved the sky. It had always felt like freedom. Now it felt like a trap, a place far from help. The intercom clicked again. The co-pilot spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are working with assistance from someone on board who has flying experience. A wave of mixed emotions swept through the cabin. Relief and fear collided. Relief that someone had stepped forward. Fear because it still wasn't certain if he could handle this enormous machine. The woman in row 14 opened her eyes and noticed an elderly passenger across the aisle, holding the hand of a younger traveler. Strangers before this moment, now bound together by fear. There was something human and fragile about it, something that made her own heart soften despite the tension. Time seemed to move strangely. Minutes felt like hours. Every little bump in the air made people grip their armrests tighter. Every slight tilt of the wings sent shivers down spines. The silence was broken only by coughing, quiet sobs, and the faint creaks of the aircraft shifting against the wind. The crew returned again, this time whispering among themselves. One attendant accidentally dropped a small tray. The metallic clang echoed through the cabin like thunder. Passengers flinched, a reminder of how raw their nerves had become. The woman thought of her family waiting at home. She imagined her mother cooking dinner, unaware of the storm her daughter was facing high above the earth. She imagined her younger brother playing games, laughing without worry. She held those pictures tightly in her mind, as if they could anchor her to safety. Suddenly, a loud beep from the cockpit broke the uneasy rhythm. Passengers exchanged alarmed looks, no explanation followed, and the silence that came after the sound was even more frightening. The woman's breathing quickened, but she forced herself to look out of the window. The horizon was still there, endless and calm, nature unmoved by the struggles inside the plane. Another announcement came, this time from the man who had stepped forward. His voice unfamiliar yet steady. This is not an easy situation, but we are doing our best. Please stay calm. He did not reveal details, perhaps to avoid panic, but his tone carried weight. It was a reminder that he was now part of the fight to keep them safe. The woman in row 14 studied the faces around her. A young couple holding each other close, a business traveler staring blankly ahead, a teenager biting his nails nervously. Fear looked different on every face, yet it connected them all like an invisible thread. Minutes passed, then a jolt shook the cabin. A sharp drop that made hearts leap into throats. A scream rose from the back. Children cried. The woman gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned pale, but the aircraft steadied again. The engines hummed on. She closed her eyes once more, whispering softly to herself, "Hold on, just hold on." Her voice cracked, but the words gave her strength. It was all anyone could do now: wait, hope, and trust that the stranger in the cockpit and the young co-pilot could guide them through the storm that no one had planned for. The woman opened her eyes again and fixed them on the clouds outside. They looked endless, as though guarding some secret. She wondered if they would be her last sight, or if they would one day remind her of how fragile life could be. And in that suspended moment, row 14 became more than just a seat. It became a place where hope, fear, and memory lived side by side, a place where one heart prayed silently for the chance to land on solid ground once more. The cabin had fallen into a heavy silence, the kind that pressed against the chest and made every sound sharper. Passengers hardly moved, their eyes fixed on the closed cockpit door, waiting for some sign, some word that would tell them what came next. The woman in row 14 sat frozen, her hands gripping her seatbelt as if it were a lifeline. The hum of the engines felt louder now, each vibration running through her body. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of the unknown made it hard beside her. A young boy asked his mother in a trembling whisper, "Are we going to be okay?" The mother's smile was thin, her eyes wet. She stroked his hair and said softly, "Yes, everything will be fine." Even though her voice betrayed the fear she was holding back. The intercom crackled again, and the co-pilot's voice filled the cabin. "We are in touch with ground control. Please remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." Though the words were steady, the pauses between them carried tension, the kind that told passengers the truth was far more serious than what was being shared. The woman's thoughts drifted to the cockpit. She pictured the man from row 10 sitting nervously in the pilot's seat, his hands gripping unfamiliar controls, listening carefully to instructions through his headset. She imagined the co-pilot beside him, young but forced to carry a responsibility far greater than his years. The crew moved quietly down the aisles, picking up cups, checking belts again, their eyes darting from face to face. They were trained to stay calm, yet even they could not fully mask the unease that lingered in their movements. Suddenly a small shudder passed through the plane, just enough to make overhead bins rattle. Passengers gasped. Some clutched the seats in front of them. The woman in row 14 pressed her head back and whispered, "Please, not now," her words barely audible. But she needed to release them. A man in row 8 began pacing, ignoring the crew's request to sit. He muttered loudly about not wanting to die in the sky, his fear spilling out for everyone to hear. The attendants rushed to calm him, gently guiding him back into his seat, but his panic had already spread like a ripple through the rows. The woman watched as tension grew, and she realized something quietly powerful. Fear was not just in the cockpit, it was inside every passenger, and if it was not contained, it could break them before the plane even landed. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself, reminding herself of her father's words. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. The intercom buzzed once more. This time it was the stranger's voice, the man who had stepped forward. "We are working through it. Stay strong. We are not giving up." His words were brief, but they carried something different, a raw honesty that connected with the passengers. They could feel his determination, and it gave them a small thread of hope. The woman closed her eyes and imagined the earth far below, steady, unshaken by what was happening above it. She longed to feel solid ground under her feet, to smell fresh air untainted by recycled oxygen, to hear her family's voices again. The thought both comforted and broke her heart. A sudden jolt made the lights flicker briefly. Children screamed, adults gasped. One attendant stumbled but quickly regained balance. The plane steadied, but the moment left a mark. It reminded everyone how fragile their situation truly was. The woman turned to the window again. The sky stretched endlessly, golden light, painting the edges of the clouds. It was beautiful. Cruelly beautiful, she thought. How strange that the world outside could look so peaceful. While inside the cabin, fear sat on every face. She noticed the elderly passenger across the aisle once more, still holding the younger traveler's hand, their eyes closed, whispering something quietly between them, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise. She realized in moments like these, strangers became family, bound not by blood but by survival. Time moved slowly, the hands of the clock unseen but felt in every heartbeat, every breath, every glance toward the cockpit door. No one knew how long the struggle would last. No one knew how much strength was left in the men trying to guide the plane. The woman pressed her palms together, not in prayer but in focus. She told herself she would not let fear consume her. She would not let panic win. She was determined to hold on to hope, even if it was only a thin thread, because sometimes a thread was enough to keep a person alive. And so row 14, with its quiet occupant and her steadying breath, became a small island of strength within the sea of fear. An unspoken reminder that even in the darkest skies there was still a chance, still a reason to believe they could make it through. The cockpit door remained closed, but its silence spoke louder than words. Passengers stared at it as though answers might break through at any moment. The hum of the engines was steady, yet inside the cabin, hearts beat far too fast. The woman in row 14 sat upright, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Fear had changed the air. It was thicker now. Every breath carried weight. She could see passengers gripping seats, whispering quietly, some even writing hurried notes on scraps of paper, notes that might never be read, but were written out of love and desperation. A flight attendant walked by with a forced smile, whispering gently, "It will be okay. Please stay calm." Yet even her eyes betrayed unease. The woman nodded politely, but deep inside she knew that calmness now was like holding on to glass. It could shatter with the slightest shake. Inside the cockpit, the man from row 10 sat beside the young co-pilot, his hands trembling slightly as he followed instructions. Ground control's voice echoed in his headset, guiding him through steps he had never imagined performing on such a massive aircraft. Sweat gathered on his brow, but he focused, reminding himself of the small planes he had flown long ago. Back in the cabin, the passengers had begun forming silent bonds. Strangers leaned on each other, sharing whispered reassurances. A woman offered candy to a frightened child she had never met. A businessman gave his jacket to an elderly passenger who shivered despite the warmth. The woman in row 14 watched all this, her heart aching with both fear and admiration. She realized that in moments of crisis, humanity showed itself in the simplest ways, in kindness, in the need to comfort someone else even when your own fear was unbearable. Suddenly, the plane tilted slightly, not violently, but enough to make drinks spill and passengers gasp. Oxygen masks swayed gently from their compartments, though they had not been released. The co-pilot's voice came quickly over the intercom. "Please stay seated and keep your belts fastened. Everything is under control." But the strain in his tone told another story. The woman's chest tightened. She glanced out the window again. The clouds now glowed orange as the sun began to set. The beauty of the sky clashed with the fear inside her, she thought to herself. How can the world look so peaceful while our hearts are in chaos? Near the back, a teenager began crying loudly. His friend hugged him tightly, whispering that it would be fine. Their voices were raw, their fear honest, the kind of fear that could not be hidden. The attendants passed through again, their steps faster now, their eyes flicking often toward the cockpit door. One of them paused at row 14, bending slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The woman nodded, though her lips trembled. "Yes, just waiting." The attendant gave a faint smile and moved on. The woman lowered her gaze to her hands, noticing how tightly they were clasped together. Her nails pressing into her skin, she loosened them slowly, inhaling deeply, telling herself she needed to stay calm, if not for herself, then for the energy she carried into the air around her. She knew fear could spread, but so could strength. Then, the intercom clicked again, and this time it was the man from row 10. His voice steady but heavy. "We are trying everything. Please trust us, we are not alone. Ground control is with us. We are going to do our best." The cabin fell silent, passengers listening carefully to every syllable. The woman felt something shift inside her. His words were not a promise, but they were honest, and honesty carried its own kind of strength. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Hold on. Just hold on," repeating it like a small prayer. Minutes stretched on like hours. Every small sound felt magnified. The creak of the wings, the soft rustle of the crew's uniforms, the faint whir of the air system, each one reminding passengers of where they were, suspended between sky and earth, dependent on strangers for survival. The woman lifted her gaze and met the eyes of the elderly passenger across the aisle, still holding the younger traveler's hand. Their silent bond gave her courage. She nodded slightly to them, and they nodded back. No words needed, just a shared understanding of hope. The plane steadied once more, and for a moment the cabin felt lighter. Though fear lingered like a shadow, the woman knew they were still far from safe. Yet she also knew something important. Hope had not vanished. It was fragile, but it was alive, and for now that was enough. And as the sky outside deepened into shades of purple and gold, the passengers of Flight 14 remained bound together by silence, by fear, and by a fragile but unbroken thread of faith that somehow, against all odds, they would find their way back to solid ground. Darkness had now started to creep across the sky, the last colors of sunset fading into deep blue. The cabin lights glowed softly, casting pale reflections on anxious faces. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside, no one felt steady at all. The woman in row 14 pressed her forehead lightly against the window. She could see tiny stars appearing beyond the clouds. They looked calm, distant, eternal. Yet here she was, caught between fear and hope, every minute stretching longer than the one before. The intercom clicked once again. The co-pilot's voice came through. "We are working closely with ground control to prepare for landing. Please remain seated and keep calm." His words were measured, but the weight behind them was clear. The landing would not be simple. It would be a test. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Landing was supposed to be the most routine part of flying, yet now it sounded like the most dangerous. Whispers moved quickly through the rows, each person imagining their own ending. Some hopeful, some grim. The woman sat back and closed her eyes. She could hear a man 2 rows behind her speaking quietly into his phone, leaving a voice message. His words cracked as he told someone he loved them, promising he would see them again. His voice carried the ache of someone unsure if that promise could be kept. A child began asking questions too loudly. "Why is everyone scared? Why can't we land?" The mother hushed him gently, stroking his hair. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. The child leaned into her, sensing the truth without fully understanding it. The attendants moved faster now, their instructions more direct. Trays locked, seats upright, belts checked again. Their smiles had disappeared, replaced by clipped words and determined expressions. They knew what the passengers did not. This would not be a smooth descent. The woman in row 14 tightened her belt, her heart racing. She remembered every landing she had ever taken before, the slight bumps, the feeling of wheels meeting the ground, the relief that always followed. Now even imagining that moment felt like a dream too far away. In the cockpit, the man from row 10 followed instructions closely. His hands steady on the controls, the co-pilot guided him, both listening to ground control's calm but urgent directions. Every small mistake could mean disaster. Every correct move could mean survival. The plane tilted again, descending slightly. Passengers gasped. Some prayed aloud. Others buried their faces in their hands. The woman gripped the armrests, whispering to herself, "We can make it. We can make it." Her breath shaky but determined. The cabin filled with sounds of fear, murmured prayers, trembling voices, the faint sobs of those too overwhelmed to hide it. Yet beneath it all there was a strange strength too, a shared will to reach the ground, a collective thread binding every passenger together. The woman glanced across the aisle, the elderly passenger and the younger traveler still holding hands, their eyes closed tightly, whispering softly to each other. She envied their courage but also drew strength from it. The plane jolted suddenly, a sharp drop that sent cups flying and passengers crying out. The lights flickered for a moment before steadying again. The woman's chest tightened, her heart beating so loudly she thought others could hear it. The co-pilot's voice returned quickly. "Remain seated, stay calm. We are still in control." But everyone knew control was fragile. She thought about her family again, her mother's gentle voice, her brother's laughter, the warmth of home. She held those memories tightly, as though carrying them in her heart could protect her. The crew knelt beside frightened passengers, speaking quietly, offering tissues, holding trembling hands. Their humanity breaking through their professional masks, they too were afraid, but they would not let fear stop them from caring for the people around them. The woman inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay still, forcing herself to believe she knew panic would not save her. But courage might, even if it was small. Even if it was fragile, she told herself. If I can stay strong, maybe someone else can too. As the aircraft continued its careful descent, the sound of the engine seemed louder, the rush of air against the metal body sharper. Every passenger felt it in their bones, the truth that they were closer now to either safety or tragedy. The woman tightened her grip once more, whispering, "Please, let us land," her voice almost silent. But in that whisper lived every hope, every fear, every dream of survival that filled the cabin of Flight 14. And as the city lights far below began to flicker faintly through breaks in the clouds, the passengers realized that the moment of truth was approaching, and nothing, not fear, not prayers, not courage, could stop it from coming. The city lights below grew brighter as the aircraft descended. Glowing dots scattered like jewels across the darkness. To the passengers it looked like hope flickering beneath the clouds, yet it also reminded them how far away safety still was. The woman in row 14 pressed her palms together, her breath shallow. She could feel the tension in her chest, each heartbeat louder than the engines themselves. She whispered softly, "Almost there, just a little more." Her words carried the weight of both hope and fear. The intercom buzzed. The co-pilot's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for approach. Please remain seated, keep your belts fastened, and stay calm. The cabin fell into absolute silence. No more whispers, no more sobs. Just silence filled with heavy breathing and restless eyes. The woman glanced around. Every face told its own story. The young boy leaning into his mother's arms. The businessman clutching a folded letter in his lap. The elderly passenger across the aisle still holding the younger traveler's hand tightly. All bound together by one truth. They were at the edge of something unknown. The cockpit was a storm of tension. The man from row 10 followed ground control's instructions step by step, his hands gripping the controls. The co-pilot's voice steady but firm beside him. Sweat ran down his face, but his eyes stayed fixed. Determination burning through the fear. The aircraft dipped lower. Turbulence shook it gently, then harder. Passengers gasped as overhead bins rattled. A cry broke out from the back. Someone whispered a prayer loudly enough for others to join in, their voices weaving together like a fragile song. The woman closed her eyes tightly. She imagined the feeling of wheels touching solid ground. The jolt, the roar, the relief. She imagined herself walking out into fresh air, her family's arms around her. She clung to that image as though it was the only thing keeping her heart steady. A sudden alarm beeped inside the cockpit, sharp and demanding. The stranger's hands trembled, but he held on. The co-pilot spoke quickly, adjusting switches. Voices from ground control filled their headsets, giving instructions in clipped, urgent tones. Every second felt like a knife edge. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the change. The descent seemed steeper, their bodies pressing against seatbelts. Gasps filled the air. The woman in row 14 gripped the armrest so tightly her fingers hurt. But she didn't let go. She whispered again. Hold on. Please hold on. The plane shook once more. A rough patch of air throwing cups and bags against the floor. Screams echoed. Children cried. Attendants rushed to calm them, though their own hands shook. The cabin was filled with raw, unfiltered fear. Yet in the middle of that chaos, there were moments of quiet bravery, too. A young man whispered reassurances to the elderly woman beside him. A mother kissed her child's forehead again and again. A stranger offered tissues to the man sobbing silently 2 seats away. The woman in row 14 noticed it, and something inside her softened. Even in fear, people chose kindness. Even at the edge of disaster, humanity still reached for each other. It gave her strength to keep breathing, to keep believing. The lights of the city grew larger now. Roads and buildings faintly visible through the windows. Passengers strained to see them, as if looking at the ground could somehow pull the plane closer to safety. The woman pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering, "Almost there," her voice trembling but determined. The intercom came alive once more. This time the voice of the stranger filled the cabin. His words short but heavy. "We are going to try this. Please stay strong." His honesty rang clear. He was not promising perfection, only effort. And somehow that truth gave the passengers a strange kind of hope. The engines roared louder as the descent deepened. The floor vibrated under their feet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Outside, the runway lights could now be seen faintly in the distance, glowing lines guiding them through the night. The woman felt tears rise in her eyes. Not just from fear, but from the overwhelming mix of emotions. She whispered softly, "Please, just let us touch the ground." Her voice cracked but carried all the hope in her heart. The aircraft dropped lower. The sound of wind rushing past the fuselage louder. Every passenger holding their breath as if their silence could help the plane. Every soul inside bound together by one wish, to survive the landing. And as the runway lights grew closer, brighter, sharper, against the night, the cabin braced itself, hearts racing, hands gripping tightly, prayers whispered desperately, everyone waiting for the moment that would decide everything. The runway lights now glowed brightly below, sharp lines cutting through the night. Passengers pressed against their windows, eyes wide, hearts racing. It was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment they had feared. The woman in row 14 held her breath, her fingers digging into the armrests. She whispered softly, "Please, just let us land." Her voice almost lost in the roar of the engines, her eyes fixed on the glowing path below. In the cockpit, the co-pilot's voice was calm but firm, guiding every move. "Steady, lower the nose slightly, hold it steady." The man from row 10 followed his words with trembling hands, every muscle in his body tense, sweat dripping into his eyes, but his focus unbroken. The plane dipped lower, the ground rising to meet them, the cabin filled with shallow breaths and silent prayers. Children clung to parents. Strangers squeezed each other's hands. The air was heavy with fear and hope tangled together. The woman closed her eyes tightly. She imagined the wheels touching down. She imagined the vibration, the sudden rush, the relief. She imagined the plane slowing, the cabin filling with gasps of joy instead of terror. She clung to that picture as though it could pull her into reality. A sudden jolt shook the cabin as the plane hit turbulence. Screams broke out, the wings swayed, drinks spilled, oxygen masks swung violently. But the stranger in the cockpit held the controls steady. His voice strained but steady. "We've got it." "Hold on." The engines roared louder. The descent sharper. The runway lights racing closer. Passengers braced themselves, some with eyes shut, some staring straight ahead, all bound by the same desperate hope. The woman in row 14 gripped her belt tightly, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She whispered once more, "Please, please, please," her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Then it came. The hard thud of wheels meeting asphalt, the entire cabin jolted violently. Bags tumbled from compartments, cries filled the air. The plane bounced once, then again before the wheels gripped firmly, the roar of engines fighting to slow them down. Passengers screamed, then gasped, then fell into stunned silence as the aircraft hurtled forward, the vibrations rattling through every seat, the stranger's hands tight on the controls, the co-pilot guiding every move, the brakes straining, the lights of the runway flashing past in blinding streaks. The woman felt her body pressed forward against the belt, her teeth clenched, her eyes wide. She whispered through gritted teeth, "Stay, stay, stay," as if her words could anchor the plane to the ground. Finally, after what felt like forever, the speed slowed, the vibration softened, the deafening roar quieted. The aircraft rolled to a steady crawl, the runway lights now calm instead of rushing blurs. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke, the cabin frozen in disbelief. The only sound was the soft hum of engines idling and the faint, broken sobs of passengers who could not hold it in any longer. The woman in row 14 let out a shaky breath, her body trembling. She pressed her face into her hands, tears wetting her palms. She could not believe it. They were alive. They had made it. Then the cabin erupted. Gasps turned to cheers. Sobs turned to laughter. Strangers hugged. Mothers kissed their children's foreheads again and again. Hands shook with relief. Voices broke as they whispered thank you to no one in particular. Just to life itself, the attendants moved quickly, some wiping their own tears as they reassured passengers. "You're safe now. We are on the ground." Their words felt like a miracle. The woman looked out the window once more. The runway lights stretched ahead, calm, solid, unshaken. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, whispering, "Thank you." Her voice steady for the first time since the ordeal began. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot and the stranger exchanged exhausted glances, both trembling, both too overwhelmed to speak, the weight of what they had done settling over them. The voices of ground control filled the headsets, congratulating, guiding them forward. But in that moment, all they felt was relief. As the plane rolled slowly toward the terminal, passengers leaned back, drained yet alive. The fear that had once bound them now transformed into gratitude. They had faced the unthinkable together, and they had survived. The woman in row 14 wiped her tears, her heart still pounding, but now with life, with the sharp reminder of how fragile it was. She looked around at the faces near her, strangers still yet forever connected by this night, by this flight. When the plane finally stopped, the cabin filled with the sound of buckles clicking, voices rising, people embracing, thanking the crew, thanking each other. The woman sat quietly for a moment longer, breathing deeply, holding on to the feeling of being alive. And as she stood to leave, stepping into the aisle among the crowd of relieved souls, she thought to herself, "I will never forget row 14, because it was more than a seat. It was where she had discovered both the edge of fear and the strength of hope.